Hello, you gorgeous individual. If you're a new listener, you are most welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. I'm delighted to have you here either way. Now, before we get into my conversation with Daniel and Jose Luis from the ELT in Chile podcast that I did, in January now? I just want to say a really big thank you to everyone listening who has helped my podcast grow over the last 6 months or so, since I've been going it alone, basically. It was quite scary when I started, but I'm so glad I persevered, and every time I get a positive comment or a private message from someone telling me that they've enjoyed their podcast, it makes it all worthwhile. I seem to have a real core of listeners who tune in every week. I'd love to know more about you and who you are. So as you know, I release an episode 3 weeks out of every month on a Monday usually, and I post a little soundbite on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn under Erin O'Byrne on LinkedIn. I'd love you to listen and then find that post on my social media and comment beneath it. Comment about, what you thought of the episode, if you have any other thoughts, things that I didn't include, anything really. I'd just love you to talk to me and also engage with anybody else commenting on those posts as well. I'd love to build a community around the podcast. Another thing you can do is to share the post that I talked about on your story or maybe on your feed, and this helps to spread the word of everything EFL to other teachers. If you listen on Spotify or iTunes, you could always leave 5 stars or a kind-worded review to push me up the ratings as well. Anyway, enough about me. Here is my discussion from January with Daniel and Jose Luis of ELT in Chile podcast. Enjoy! Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, my little podcast about English language teaching and other teachy stuff too. Credit and honourable mentions will be given during the episode or in the show notes. Let's crack on. So I think it might be best if you just do an in a nutshell self-introduction, guys. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Jose Luis.
Okay, so my name is Jose Luis Poblete. I'm an English teacher. I also have a master's degree in linguistics and literature. I've been working, a lot teaching at universities where I usually teach English language courses and also linguistics. And now we've been experimenting a lot, during the last 2 years with corpus linguistics. I also teach freelance. I've taught in high schools and primary schools here in Chile. So I think I've been teaching for, more than 10 years. That's a long time. And we have this project with Daniel, this podcast project, and I also participate in a research group with some other colleagues, Carlos Veloso and Esther Singer. So I think that would be my, introduction. Daniel, your turn.
Busy bee.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So my name is Daniel Gwynn. I am from the United States. People can probably tell from my voice and looking at me. So with my educational background, I studied Spanish, German, and education in university. And I got my teaching credentials and master's in teaching. So before coming to Chile, I taught kindergarten, Spanish, and German in California and also in New Jersey. And let's see, I have been here about 11 years. I started out teaching at a school as a teaching assistant, then I moved on to teaching in institutes, universities, and now I'm working completely freelance. And as Jose Luis said, I am one half the ELT in Chile podcast that we do together.
Lovely. So I think that will probably lead to my first question. And I think, Daniel, you'll have to answer this one. What brought you to Chile? How did you get your first job?
Well, I originally wanted to come here right after I graduated from university. And the first 3 opportunities didn't work out for me. So I went into teaching in California, got laid off 3 years in a row with the economy. And then I found this program called Teaching Chile. So I actually went over with them. They got me set up with a student visa. They put me in a school as a teaching assistant. And so that was how I first got here.
Okay. And again, I'm going to start with Daniel and then
Sure.
Jose Luis, you can probably kind of jump in as and when. What cultural differences are there between your nationality and Chileans that a teacher has to be mindful of in the classroom that could cause a misunderstanding?
That's a really good question. If we're thinking strictly in the classroom, I think one thing is that Chileans in general aren't really used to working in groups and not really used to pair work. They're very much used to copying down from the board and there being one correct answer. The teacher calling on one student, that student giving a response. So the idea of working in partners, doing things that are more student-centered, working in groups. Chileans, they don't really understand how it works at first. So I think the teachers need to be a little patient with them. When they're starting to see what that feels like and what that looks like.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you think that's accurate, Jose Luis?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that we've been trying to implement for a while. The idea of, let's say, having people working together, and also, like you said, student-centered activities. Those are very difficult for us because, let's say, in Chile, I think most people are used to the teacher having everything under control, like you giving the activities, let's say teachers checking the work. So I think that in a way, like, let's say, having more autonomous students, I think that's been a big challenge here because of, let's say, the way that the culture works here.
And how about outside the classroom, Jose Luis? Would there be something that a foreigner coming into Chile should know, maybe in a social context, something like that?
I mean, in social context, I think that things are a little different, in social context, like, for example, Daniel and, myself, we usually see our students, let's say, we can run into them and we can have a friendly conversation, and they're really friendly to us. But I think, let's say, the classroom makes let's say, a change in people's, let's say, way of maybe behaving. But let's say, because I think everybody expects the teacher to be, let's say, the person who has all the, let's say, knowledge. And outside the classroom, things are, let's say, different. Chileans are really friendly, we tend to be really friendly people. We are really welcoming. And I don't know, Danny, what do you have to say about that?
So I think of two main things. One thing that I think of is that in terms of a social situation or, interacting with students outside of the classroom, one thing is there is a word that does not exist in the Chilean vocabulary, and that is the word no. So for some reason for Chileans, it's very, very uncomfortable to have to tell someone no. And even if you say it in a very polite way, it's very, very difficult for them, and they see it as very, very rude. So what happens is their way of saying no will be things like saying, oh, yeah, maybe that sounds like a good idea. I'll call you when I have time. Or they may just not respond whatsoever. And if you do not know that little nuance of communication in Chile, it can make things very, very complicated. If you're like a very, very concrete person. Okay. Another thing I think of is that people will make plans, but then they're not confirmed unless you confirm the day before. Because I think the way the Chileans think, it's like, okay, they have a plan. They have, an idea of what they want to do, but things change along the way. Maybe something's come up with a family, member. Maybe something's come up with a friend. Maybe as time gets closer, they decide they don't really want to follow through with that plan. So I think that's one thing that I've had to get used to, confirming things the day before.
Okay. And would you say those two statements are fair, Jose Luis?
Yeah, I mean, like the what Daniel said about, let's say, saying no, I think that's something that we usually teach. For example, when I have to teach modal verbs, like, yeah, I'm going to go, I will go, I may go, and I might go. I think if I just give the equivalent in Spanish, people just go like, oh yeah, like I may go, that means like no, but I just have to tell them like, just say no to that. So, and let's say, the second thing, I mean, I've known Daniel for, let's say, for a couple of years now. And I mean, I also, let's say, have, let's say, a sort of planner, so in that way I really need to, let's say, but that's true, we have to confirm things. If I have, let's say, a private class, I have to talk to my student, let's say, the day before, like, okay, so we're having a class tomorrow, right? So I really have to confirm, like, have to be, let's say, on top of that. Otherwise, let's say, people are going to assume that's not happening, and that can be really annoying if somebody's not really used to, let's say, the way that we usually let's say, function.
Wow, that's really interesting and very useful, I think, which is exactly why I'm recording this episode. So brilliant. We're on the right track. So let's just do a little sidetrack and dive into a couple of true falses here. I'm just going to throw a few stereotypes at you or statements at you, and you can just tell me whether they're true or false. Okay. Okay. First one. Chile has great Merlot.
Well, Let's say in terms of wine, I do think, well, not, I don't know if it's Merlot exactly, but let's say Cabernet Sauvignon. I think that's one of the most famous ones. But let's say in terms of wine, Chile has pretty good wine. So I would say it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really drink too much anymore, but I do know from times when I have drunk before, the wine is very good quality. It is very affordable compared to other parts of the world.
True.
Okay, that's one great reason to get on a plane and fly over to see you then. Next one. Let's have a look. Street food. Street food is a thing?
I think it is a thing, but I don't know that I would really eat much street food. I would get things like sopaipillas, which is kind of like fried dough that people eat. I don't know that I would eat meat off of as street food and things like that, because I don't know that it's cooked properly. I don't know, with the sanitation and things like that. So that's my take on it. I don't know. What do you think, Jose Luis?
I think, yeah, I mean, there is some street food, but let's say Chilean people don't usually have street food. They will usually go to, for like Daniel said, the example of the fried dough. Let's say in the last few years, there's been an influx of immigrants from Venezuela and Peru. They have brought, let's say, their own street food, let's say, but Chilean street food, I don't think it's very common to find here. I mean, because you can usually find those things in I don't know, in a restaurant, like much, let's say that's easier. They are really easy to find. I mean, here really we eat sandwiches a lot. So like hot dogs, so you can find them everywhere.
Oh yeah, the completos.
The completos.
The Chilean hot dogs.
The Chilean hot dogs, yeah.
Sounds good. Chileans dance salsa.
Well, I would say people can try to dance salsa, but we're not really good at dancing salsa because that's more like from, for example, if you know somebody from Colombia, Costa Rica, or maybe from Venezuela, they're going to be really good at dancing salsa. We tend to have our own version, but I don't think we can try to dance salsa, but we're not really good at dancing salsa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I think of salsa, I don't think of Chileans. No. I don't think of Chile. I mean, I think of Cueca, which is the national dance here, which is really popular in September. But other than that, I don't really think about Chileans really dancing much as part of their culture.
Okay. Tell me more about this dance. I love dancing, so I'm interested.
I mean, like Daniel said, we usually dance, to Cueca in September because that's when our national holiday, takes place. And it kind of, imitates like two birds, like a rooster and a hen. So the idea is like the man is like a rooster and like the woman is like a hen. So you have to try to dance with her, follow her. And it's been it's a very old dance, but it kind of, represents that. And I can send you a link so you can, watch the way it's danced. And it's pretty short, it takes up to, I think not more than 2 minutes, per dance, because there are different types of urban, more traditional.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And I'll stick it on the show notes as well. So anybody listening can have a look.
There you go.
Brilliant. Oh, this is such a productive conversation. Okay, let's dive back in again. So can you talk about a couple of linguistic issues, including pronunciation, if you like, that are useful for a teacher to know about? I wrote the Chilean language. I mean, I know it's Spanish, but it obviously has its own little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. One thing that I think of is I think of the pronunciation and listening of vowels. So, for example, things like sing, sang, sung. It's very difficult for students to hear that difference. So what I find that I do is I say, all right, I'm going to say the first one, and it's like I'm smiling. Sing.
Yeah.
All right, and I have them imitate me. Okay, so now with me being from the United States, the way that I say sang, my jaw really drops, and I exaggerate and I say. So I say sang.
Yeah.
And I make them really say it and then exaggerate it with me. Sang. And then sung. So I say my lips are going to be rounded like I'm going to kiss someone. Sung. And I really exaggerate that. And that's one thing that is nice with online classes is that students can really see your face.
Yeah, I did a podcast about pronunciation and sort of in class and online just at the end of last year. 36 or 37, I can't remember which episode, but I talked about vowel sounds as well, because not all sounds are easy to do online, but vowel sounds are, because it's changing the shape of your mouth. And the way I do and is I start with and I say drop your jaw, like this, and then for the a sound, like apple, I say do the same thing, and then smile, ah. like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice
Yeah.
to see different ways of doing it.
I think that that's something like something that Daniel mentioned is like because that combination NG does not really exist here in Spanish. I mean, and also like one of the biggest difficulties that Chilean students face in Spanish, we at the end of words, if the word ends in an S, we tend to aspirate the S. So, for example, I'm going to say something like martes, which is Tuesday, so I could just say Marte. So when students need to pronounce the final S at the end of a word in English, it's very difficult because you have to really like focus. And I have to tell them like you have to pronounce that and say like I don't know bus or like works. So you really have to say that, otherwise, because it's at the end, people would tend to, let's say, not pronounce that final sound.
So I think that kind of leads into also contractions, where you might say, I lived in the United States for 4 years versus I've lived in the United States for 4 years. So there we see a difference in meaning. So we see that with contractions, also the past simple, like cooked, played. So I think that carries over in that way also.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a little bit about the general lifestyle, but can you give me some examples of some general lifestyle differences, including the cost of living, that might be interesting for people to know?
That I would say is a really, really big question.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's so much to say. I think one of the things that I really, really like is that I do not need a car living in Santiago. So I have no car payment. I don't have to pay for car insurance. I don't have to pay for gas, maintenance, all those things. And so Chileans, I think in general, don't really agree with me on this. But I think the transportation system in Santiago is pretty damn good. I mean, you've got, I think, 6 subway lines now. You've got buses that run regularly. It's clean. I think it's safe, in most areas. And, it is expensive compared to maybe other cities, but it does get you from point A to point B.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like I agree with Daniel. I don't have a car. I ride my bike. When I go to work, I usually take the subway, and I think that transportation system is, let's say, yeah, it's pretty good. And let's say in terms of maybe cost of living, I think that's a difficult question to answer because everything will depend on the type of job you have. For example, if Daniel works as a freelance teacher, I work I work, let's say, at a university. And I also have some, let's say, I have a part-time job. Let's say teaching private lessons, but let's say most of my work I do most of my work at a university. So of course, and if you worked at a school, like as a full-time teacher, so I think everything will depend on the type of job you can find. Also, let's say language institutes.
Yeah, I think one thing, trying to put it into context for anyone to understand, regardless of, what currency they're thinking of, what type of lifestyle they're thinking of. So I believe the minimum wage now is about 400,000 Chilean pesos, maybe a little more than that. To give you an idea, I live in a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment in a nice neighborhood, not really upscale, but not really, lower down either. It's not like in a bad neighborhood. And so my rent is 365,000 Chilean pesos per month.
What does that translate as in dollars?
In dollars, that's probably about, it's hard to tell with the exchange rate. I would say like maybe about $600, $700 a month, which doesn't really sound like that much. But remember, the minimum wage is 400,000 Chilean pesos per month. So if you take a look, if you're working a minimum wage job, you cannot afford to live on your own in a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment.
Yeah.
So this is one issue that I think we saw come up in October of 2019, all the social inequality, and we saw, the social unrest, that all these decisions are being made that is affecting the lower class and the working class that can't really afford to pay for these things.
Yeah. So I think, let's say in that way, let's say that's true. Like if you're not a professional, let's say if you want to come, let's say to Chile and let's say work as a teacher, let's say you will really have to work basically full time, you know, like to be able to afford, let's say, an apartment or to have, let's say, a good life style here. But I think it is possible. But for example, Daniel, how many hours do you usually teach a week?
So I usually teach about 25 hours a week.
Yeah.
Now, given the circumstances of us being online, I don't have to worry about the time, commuting to and from classes. Whereas in the past, I did have to consider that. But I mean, yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I've been here 11 years. So, and the last 5 of those have been freelance. So that has helped, building up my reputation, having the freedom to choose my students and things like that. Because I mean, schools here do not pay well, considering the amount of students you have.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the bilingual schools, maybe some of the schools, that are really well off, that I think they pay better.
Yeah.
But I think that overall, the conditions that you have and the expectations, it's so much work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, let's say, if you want to work here in Chile, you have to at least, let's say, be expected to work, I don't know, between 30 and 40 hours a week teaching.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And that doesn't include your lesson planning, everything else, grading and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's one of those things that the ELT industry, or whatever you want to call it, it's the standards are just so shockingly different from country to country. In some countries you could have amazing conditions, really good pay, and in others you've got absolutely no rights and low pay. But what can you tell us about the general working environment in a language school or in a school?
That's a good question. I mean, well, when I was a teaching assistant, there didn't really seem to be any type of support for the teachers. It seemed to be more about keeping the students and the parents happy. And I think that comes about because of the privatized system.
Yeah.
And parents and students are seen as customers that have to be kept happy no matter what. When I was working with an institute, when I was working with institutes, I was paid hourly. And so it was just paid for the classes that I taught. The first institute I was at had kind of like this homey atmosphere to it. It was kind of like a dysfunctional family, I guess you could say. But you didn't really have a human resources department. You didn't have paid vacation. You didn't have, sick leave or anything like that. So it was quite precarious. The other institute I was at paid better, but it felt very, very corporate. And I just felt kind of like I was a number, and they were just focused on making more and more and more money. And also, I mean, I think that it's an issue that's coming up. It's a bit taboo, but I think workplace bullying is a thing that happens, unfortunately. And if you don't have a human resources department to go to, that can be kind of difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I had a similar experience, like when I worked in a language institute. I think it was really friendly environment. But I think in terms of relationship between, let's say, colleagues, in my experience, it was, let's say, good, also with my bosses and things like that. The only bad thing that I saw, let's say, working at the language institute is like everything was based on the amount of hours you could teach, because let's say, like Daniel said, you are paid per hour. So let's say, if you could take, let's say, teach more hours, that was going to be for you, maybe you're going to receive a higher salary. But that would also, let's say, involve working more, like probably that's why. And it let's say it will depend now. Everything is online, but let's say when we go back to a regular situation, you have to go to a company, maybe go back to the language institute, or go to the school, or go to the university, maybe go. And so we have to move around a lot.
Okay, so
it's a really big city.
Yeah, in terms of working conditions, then you wouldn't rate Chile as the best in terms of language schools and teaching?
I think it will. I think it depends on the type of job you have, because probably there are some really good institutes. let's say what happens is like, for example, I'm Chilean. Daniel is from the U.S. and sadly, this is something that happens, let's say, in most countries, because we have the issue of native speakers, non-native speakers. So like we've talked about this in our podcast as well. Like probably native speakers are going to have, let's say, a good time, and also let's say they're going to be hired. And we have some other issues, which is like the things that Daniel mentioned, like maybe the bureaucracy of the visa process, and but probably, let's say, Chilean teachers, I mean, it's much more difficult for us, even though we can be, let's say, a little bit more, more prepared. Some of my colleagues have master's degrees, PhD degrees, and things like that. But so that's also, let's say, something to consider. Probably for a native speaker is going to be, because there are institutes that are only hire native speakers,
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a huge topic. And so I think that if you're just looking at Chile, I think it depends what people's expectations are coming into it. People should not come to Chile with the expectation that they're going to make a lot of money, unless they're, looking to go freelance, work really hard, be here 10, 15, 20 years.
Okay.
I think that, they shouldn't compare it to like Japan, South Korea, anything like that. I mean, I think that you do find a sense of camaraderie at universities and at institutes. I think it's just connecting with the right people.
Yeah.
I think people make the place anywhere you go, to be honest.
Yeah.
But so what's keeping you both there? What aspect of living there do you love?
I think for me, I really like the freedom. I really like Santiago as a city. I have the beach a few hours away. So when a pandemic isn't happening, I can go away for a weekend. There's so many things to do here. You find so many different people that you can connect with, and I love that I can be my own boss here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think doing something like this would be possible in the United States.
No.
Yeah. So let's say, well, in my case, I also like working here in Chile. I've been teaching for a long time, but I think it's something connected to what Daniel said. I think it's connected with the right people, and having, let's say, I've had, let's say, many jobs here in Chile, but let's say where I am right now, I think I'm pretty comfortable. But let's say it took me a while, and also I had to study abroad to do my master's degree to, let's say, to come back to Chile, let's say, feeling more prepared. And also I think there are many things to do. There are many opportunities to create, to create stuff. That's why we created, let's say, the podcast. And the good thing is, like, we don't really know where we're going, but I think it's going to take us somewhere. But let's say it's easier to do that. But I think, like Daniel said, I think it's key to say that the country is really good, and also the coast is really close, and it's a long country, so there are many things to do.
Yeah.
And also that, let's say, connecting with the right people, I think that's something that's, let's say, key.
And what would you recommend someone visiting Chile do or visit? What would be your favorite thing to do, either in or outside of Santiago?
Well, I think, let's say, most people, when they come to Chile, they usually fly, let's say, to Santiago. You have two options here in Chile, because Chile is like, it's a really long country, 4,000 kilometers of coast. So people either go to the desert in the north, like the Atacama Desert, the driest desert on earth, or people go south to Patagonia. So, but in between, since the country is so long, you can stop and do whatever, like many things, but it depends if you like hot weather, or if you want to, let's say, go to the south of Chile. I don't know if you agree with me, Daniel.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's that's pretty much the same way I think about it. I'll tell people, you can take 4 or 5 days to see Santiago, maybe go to Viña, Valparaíso, and then from there, I recommend going up north, San Pedro, maybe Iquique, or going to the South Patagonia, Puerto Varas, the lakes region.
Yeah.
And I think they're so different, and that's one thing that's great.
Yeah, and also, yeah, absolutely.
About, staying here.
Yeah, the only thing is, like, when people look at a map, they don't think that Chile is a very long country. But let's say many of my friends have come to Chile thinking that, you can just drive a car. Sure, you can drive a car to go to one place to the other. But then when I tell them, but it's a 12-hour ride, they say, but look at the map. I'm like, I know that's the map, but
trust me, I live here.
Exactly, I live here. So
yeah,
you can take a bus from Santiago to the, let's say, desert. From Santiago, you can take a bus or drive, and it would take you to the desert like 24 hours.
Great.
Driving.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of those things. I saw a report, and based on the Mercator map, what they did way back, I think in the 1500s, 1600s, was that they made the English-speaking countries appear bigger on the map and the non-English-speaking countries smaller.
Yeah.
But then if you look at the map to scale, you actually see how much larger South America is, how much larger Africa is, Europe is, compared to the United States and other countries.
Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? So
Yeah.
what's one piece of advice that both of you would give a teacher thinking about coming to live and work in Chile?
Well, I would say, the first thing is like you have to be pretty flexible and patient because it takes time to, let's say, build up your let's say network. You have to get to know people, and most of the students that you're going to find, if you want to advertise yourself as an English teacher, you're going to get more students based on word of mouth. I think that's something that happens to me and also, let's say, to Daniel. But I think it's, of course, since we both live in Santiago, I would say that Santiago is the best place to live because it's bigger. Lots of people go to, let's say, to other regions, but I think it's much more difficult to find students and, let's say, to get a job because everything, let's say, in a way happens here in Santiago. There are like, I don't know, I would say like 8 million people here in Santiago only.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a good number of thoughts about this. And I would say the first thing, do a lot of research beforehand. And I think that this is one thing that I was kind of guilty of. I went, with this program and I expected everything was going to work perfectly. And it turns out that wasn't the case. So I kind of had to figure things out when I was already here. And so luckily it did work out in the end. But with social media and everything now, you can contact people by Facebook, Instagram, you can find blogs, all types of information. So I would say that. I would say have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. And as Jose Luis said, being flexible is really important. One thing that I do want to mention that I forgot to mention earlier when you were asking about the cost of living, I actually wrote a blog post about this, considering, the cost of an apartment, eating out, food, utilities, and things like that. If you'd like, I can go ahead and send that to you if you want to include that in the show notes.
Absolutely. Thank you. That would be brilliant. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Jose Luis?
Well, I think, let's say, finding, it will depend on the type of job that you would like to have. If you would like to go work at a school, you'll be more than welcome to work at a school, but that you need to know that, that's going to be working with 40 students, or let's say between 30 and 40 students in a classroom. And I think if you want to do that, I did that and it was fun, but it was really, let's say, time consuming planning my lessons. And I was tired, after the end of the academic year, I was really tired. And, but let's say, but Language Institute, I think that's possible. I don't know. Let's say you will have to be really willing to, like something that we both said before, be flexible and be patient. And like Daniel said, something that we've discussed, I think, in our last episode of our podcast is like that we need to, let's say, consider some other sources of income. For example, working at a language institute and teaching privately, or working at a university and teaching privately, or, doing a combination of things.
Mix it up a
Definitely.
bit. Great.
Yes.
Definitely, yeah.
And I'm going to leave my most important question to last. What food would you recommend somebody try when they're visiting Chile?
Daniel, you go first, and then I have
some. If we're talking about Chilean food, well, I do have to say that I don't really like a lot of seafood and things like that. I'm already fishy enough. So if we take out seafood and that element of, Chile being all along the coast, I would probably have to say Chorillana. And so it is French fries, usually meat, sausage, fried egg, onions. I believe those are usually the typical ingredients.
Wow, that sounds like a heart attack on a plate.
Pretty much, yeah.
We can also send you a picture, so let's say people have an idea what that looks like.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, for me, I think there are many things. I'm gonna try to pick, let's say, a few. Okay. Chileans, in let's say in world rankings, we eat bread a lot. Bread is part of, let's say, it's part of an important part of our diet because we have, let's say, bakeries everywhere. So people like bakeries, and so we have coffee, with sweet things. So that's one of the things. Another thing I can think of, well, fish. If you like seafood, we have 4,000 kilometers of coast. So the amount of, let's say, seafood you can find is awesome. And also, if you like wine, absolutely. And my personal favorite, of course, avocados. If you like avocados, here in Chile, they're everywhere. So we have avocados with, let's say, we put them in our salad and also sandwiches, and like we have our Chilean hot dogs. I mean, they're called Italianos, which translates like an Italian hot dog, because it has piece of bread, of course, a sausage, tomato, avocado, and mayonnaise, and it kind of resembles like the Italian flag. So that's why it's called an Italiano.
Sounds amazing.
There is one more food that I think of when I think of Chilean food, and it's nothing that I'm really partial to, but here they are obsessed with the mayonnaise.
Okay.
Yeah, true.
I have seen, so they will put mayonnaise and avocado and ketchup and onions on a hot dog. They put mayonnaise on corn. They put mayonnaise in rice. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they had like a mayonnaise flavored ice cream. One point or another.
That's too much. That's way too much. But we do have let's say some sort of potato salad with mayonnaise. But yeah, that's true. And also, if you like meat, we also barbecues, like with Argentina. We have the same sort of tradition. If you like barbecues, this is like a really big social event. So barbecues to celebrate, anything.
Right. This is just completely turned into a food podcast. So I think we need to wrap it up. I'm starving now. Guys, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. And I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
It was a good conversation. And then we're going to be sending you some evidence of, let's say, of the things we talked about, including our national dance, and some food that Daniel and I mentioned.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Aaron.